This is the Connected Baby podcast series, sponsored by you, the listener. If you'd like to help spread the message of the science of connection even further, then you can make a donation at connectedbaby.net/donate.
Welcome to the Connected Baby podcast, where we explore how people are putting the science of connection to use in their lives.
Welcome to our weekly Connected Baby podcast with Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk. I'm Gary Robinson. Now today our special guest is a Fellow of Dementia Care at the University of St Andrews and lead author of the Connected Baby Guide to Advanced Dementia. Dr. Maggie Ellis, hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
We're both very good. You've not said anything
Very
yet,
well today, and I'm just delighted that you're with us today, Maggie. Great.
Yes, well, me too. Slightly nerve-wracking, but you know.
And forgive the informality, may I call you Maggie?
You certainly can.
Wonderful, Maggie. First of all, tell us, and people listening, what a Fellow in Dementia Care actually does.
Okay, this was a post that was developed for me specifically, and the post involves teaching, consultancy and training. So I teach a senior honours module in psychology of dementia. I also teach on a few other modules in the university. I do some consultancy work on dementia care and communication in dementia, and I also offer some staff training.
So, Maggie, what that really means is that the university is really interested in helping people to understand how to care for people with dementia, and that's kind of a new departure for them, isn't it?
Oh, very much so, yes. There are not many areas in the university, certainly in psychology, that involve applied research, and my research is all applied. And they're now coming round to becoming more interested in applied research, specifically in dementia.
It's exciting.
Mm.
And I'm sure that when you started out your career, you weren't specifically looking at dementia. So how did you become interested in the area of dementia? Little Birdie tells me, and I never know when I do these podcasts, whether the lovely Dr. Suzanne Zeedyk is winding me up. But but I believe it's got something to do with the hokey cokey. I hope that's right.
It's true.
Yeah, okay.
That's a true story.
Well, I'm now really intrigued, as I'm sure the listener is, so please tell us more.
Okay, when I was an undergraduate doing psychology at Dundee, I had initially wanted to go into clinical psychology, which I would say probably most psychology students want to do. And at that stage, I had no voluntary work on my CV, and I knew that I had to get some voluntary work to be in with a chance of an interview to get onto clinical. And I wasn't sure what kind of voluntary work I wanted to do. At that stage, I had a friend who was a social worker for older people services in Dundee, and she said, well, why don't you ask Alzheimer's Scotland, because they're always looking for volunteers. So I did that. I got in contact with them, and they invited me along to the first session as a volunteer, and I sort of busied myself in the kitchen, not knowing what to do, and I was slightly concerned because, to my knowledge, I'd never met anyone with dementia before, and I really didn't know what to expect. And I was invited through to the day room to just get involved with the activities that were going on there. Feeling a bit nervous, I walked through there, and when I got into the room, everyone was doing the hokey cokey. So I joined in with the hokey cokey, and that really was like a pivotal moment in my life when I did the hokey cokey at the Alzheimer's Scotland Day service. I never looked back from then on. I just so enjoyed working with people with dementia, and I thought, I could really get interested in this, and just from that second, that was me. Mm-hmm. I knew what I wanted to do.
And what I love about that story is that Maggie has done all this really seminal work with her colleagues about how to engage with people with dementia, which we'll talk about in a second. But I love knowing that started with Maggie feeling nervous and getting involved in this whole career because of the hokey cokey. There's something really human about that path into a career.
And when you walked in, and they would, and in all seriousness, this question, by the way, and they were doing the hokey cokey, Is that something that they recognised in terms of something that was familiar to them? You know, that you hear a lot of stories and you read reports about, you know, if you play music to people with dementia, for instance, that they can come alive or they recognise. Was that the same sort of thing that was happening when they were doing this dance?
Yeah, very much so. You'll find that you play music to people with dementia from their youth. Even people who have quite significant difficulties in forming sentences and communicating verbally, they may remember whole songs from start to finish. So they may remember lyrics right the way through a song. And I think what is going on there is that it gives people confidence, because for one time in the day, maybe just for 2 minutes during that song, they know where they've been, they know where they are, and they know where they're going. And it keeps them orientated to what they're actually doing. It's very clear when you see something like that happening. So when I went in and saw the Hokey Cokey, people had no difficulties remembering the lyrics or the movements, the actions, you know, it all came very naturally, and those were something that were, you know, in their long-term memory and far easier to access than something that perhaps happened half an hour ago.
And of course, the science that helps us to understand that, it's not just cute, it's not just sweet. What's really happening is that the rhythm of music is providing a frame for people to step into. Brains remember the rhythm of music. And in fact, a whole lot of human interaction is rhythmic. And so when we realize that there's a scientific explanation for why music is so important to people with dementia, and in fact to all of us humans, it starts to help us to think more about this whole science of connection, and indeed the science of what some people call communicative musicality, that our brains are built for rhythm and music, which makes you think about human interaction in a whole deeper way.
Maggie,
absolutely.
You use an approach called adaptive interaction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So adaptive interaction is based on intensive interaction, which was developed in the 1980s as a way of communicating with people with severe and profound learning disabilities. And what they have in common with people with very advanced dementia is that they may have severe communication difficulties. And they may use no speech at all. People with dementia may have no speech left, and the individuals with learning difficulties may have never developed speech. So that's where the similarity lies. It's based on non-verbal communication, and it's based on the communication that the individual uses. So, for example, when people with dementia get to a stage very late on where their speech has, completely dwindled away, they will use whichever communication skills that they have to try to engage other people. And they're not always recognised as communication by other people, by us. So, for example, a person with dementia may fiddle with their clothes, they may pull their hair, they may scratch themselves, they may make loud noises. All these can be considered to be communicative behaviours, rather than us looking at them and thinking that they're meaningless, or, this person has completely lost their mind, they have no idea what's going on. If we look at them as communicative behaviours, then we can work with them.
And in the past, you've described this as learning another person's language.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I think that's because that was one of my next questions. You've summarised that absolutely perfectly. And I think for people who are looking after people who are suffering from dementia, maybe don't have an understanding of the disease, that's a really interesting point to make, is that, while I think it's an incredibly sad state, I mean, my grandma had 14 children, and I had quite a number of aunties, and most of them dealt with dementia. They had dementia towards the end of their lives. Wow. And some at quite a young age as well, from their 50s. And it's an incredibly sad disease. And obviously not just for the person who's suffering, but for those relations and for people who just can't quite understand what's happening. But I think It's not a simple statement, but learning another person's language is a relatively straightforward way to have a look at something that's very complex.
Well, this is why I think Maggie's work and the rest of her team, because she works with a wider team, people like Professor Arlene Estelle at the University of St. Andrews, who now does a lot of international work. And so between Maggie and Arlene, they've really taken this work out really widely and internationally. And what's one of the most important things about it for me is that it helps us to understand that people with advanced dementia, which sometimes people describe as having become like vegetables, which is a tough phrase, and I understand why people use it. It's because you think they're no longer in contact with us. The thing that Arlene and Maggie's work does is help us to realize they're not in that state. You can communicate with people who seem to be so far gone that you don't know how to reach them. Actually, understanding that little tiny movements are communicative behaviors lets people get in touch. It's really remarkable. Maggie, do you think I've described that well?
Very well, yeah. I think once people realise that the behaviours they once saw as meaningless, as having some sort of weight for the person with dementia, if they reflect those behaviours back and they get them back again and they start to see something happening, it's as if their eyes are opened. They've realised that there's something in this and this is just not random. Once you realise you can do something with this and you can reach the person that you're working with or the person you love, it can really open doors for both sides. So the person with dementia and the caregiver can make contact again in a different way, but certainly can make contact again.
Maggie, have you done any research to evaluate how effective this approach is? I've got 101 questions here coming up, but in terms of hard evidence behind the science, what have you done to say, yes, this actually is effective and is working?
Okay, yes, we have. Here comes the sciencey stuff. We have compared adaptive interaction to other kinds of interaction. The main one being what we call typical interaction. This would be a baseline situation. And what we did was we tried to figure out what a typical interaction would look like for a person with advanced dementia who has no speech. And it wouldn't be no interaction, so it wouldn't be the person sitting on their own. It would involve something else. And what we realised after spending several days in care homes and looking at what was going on with these individuals is we saw that caregivers, staff members would come into the room in the morning, open the curtains, say things like, how are you today, Nancy? Have you seen the weather outside today? Did you enjoy your breakfast? Etc., etc. So it would be lots of questions, but typically closed questions that you could answer yes or no with. And staff weren't waiting for a response at all, which because they wouldn't get a response, they wouldn't get a nod or a shake of the head. But it was just something to say, something to attempt to communicate with the person. So we used this as a framework to develop our baseline condition, and we organised this set of questions we would ask the person with dementia to compare with adaptive interaction. So adaptive interaction obviously involves reflecting the person's own behaviour back to them, all the sounds, the movements that they make. There's touch involved, sounds as well. And what we found was that when we used adaptive interaction, there was far more animation involved. So the person would laugh and smile and reach out to touch me. There would be lots of shared behaviour, so there'd be lots of imitation of each other. So the person with dementia would imitate me, I would imitate her. There was just a much higher level of engagement. And it was a very, very moving study to be involved in. I mean, I was in tears most days. And when I showed the videos to, care staff, managers, family members, they were just astounded by what they saw. They just didn't realise that you could connect on this level, that it was possible.
People cry all the time when they see Maggie's videos, and that's really striking because you realise that it's connecting, especially with someone that you didn't think could connect. It touches people's hearts. It just makes people cry when you see the person inside blossom. And what's powerful about Maggie's work is that we realize that there are people in care homes all over the country, and indeed in lots of other countries, who are not able to interact with people who know there's still kind of a person inside. And it's as simple as using their behaviors as a way of communicating, and suddenly there's a person inside who blossoms. Seeing that makes people cry all the time. Maggie Ellis goes around the country making people cry.
Well, you do a pretty good job of it as well, actually.
Okay, so
Yeah,
there's
you do.
several of us.
So from this, I suppose there's a couple of things that have come to my mind. There will be operational pressures within many care homes up and down the country that means that level of interaction just isn't possible.
Yes.
I suppose that's quite a frank and blunt way to put it. How do we overcome that? You may say more investment, but that may not be possible. What do you say to those hard-pushed care staff who are listening to this now, who go, yeah, do you know what? In an ideal world, that is great, but how do we make it happen?
Currently, what I would say to the hard-pushed care staff is that, okay, how do you feel about your job and communicating with people with advanced dementia? And you would get lots of responses, lots of people saying, I'm stressed, it's stressful, it's really hard to communicate with these individuals, you get nothing back. If they want to feel better about their job and they want to feel better about what they do in their job and what they are doing for people, if they just try this communication technique while they're doing other tasks, like maybe giving them a bath or feeding them or, taking them for a walk down the corridor, if you do it while you're doing that, you will get something back that you never had back before. And it doesn't have to be an extra activity. If you can see it as a way of being with someone in general, then it needn't be something extra. It will add to your enjoyment of your job and make you feel differently about what you do.
And let's not forget the role of relations in this.
That's right.
So just while you were giving me that answer, and I'm thinking about the poor hard-pushed staff.
Yeah.
I've known people that think you can put elderly parents and so on into a care home and that's it. People do that. They think, and then they've washed their hands, and sometimes forget that actually, do you know what? It's your mom, your dad, still very much your responsibility.
But I think that part of the reason when that happens, if you quote put people into a care home, is that it's often very, very painful for the rest of the family. So to watch your parent slowly die, although they're not dying because they're still there, it's just you can't make contact with them. That pain is so hard for many people to manage that they can't go in and have that daily dose of pain. What's impressive about this way of working is that you can still make contact with that person. It's actually a message of hope and joy in the midst of a really painful condition. Yeah. And what Maggie was just saying, it's not doing something extra. It's changing the way we do what we're already doing. So instead of giving a bath being a task, it's actually a way to relate, because that's the whole point of Connected Baby, is to stress the way in which our brains need relationships. And those tasks in care homes, just like tasks in all the rest of life, are places to relate. They're not simply tasks.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that in future podcasts we will be going further and deeper into this material, without a doubt. But Maggie, interesting this, linking dementia with Connected Baby, some people could say this is somewhat of an unusual departure. How do people respond to that connection? So I'm learning an awful lot by talking to Suzanne on a weekly basis about connection and the science behind it. It never dawned on me that the way that we are brought up, even before we're born, can have an effect on how we are when we're 80 and 90. So it's an amazing concept, albeit science. How do people react to that? Do they go, "Oh yeah"? Do they take it seriously?
I think people take it seriously, yes, if they understand what I'm trying to get across. I think the danger is there is very much a knee-jerk reaction to linking dementia with infancy in any way at all. People are so concerned about infantilizing people with dementia, treating them like babies or infants or small children. And that's not what we are trying to say. What we are trying to say is that people with very advanced dementia who have lost speech retain a set of skills, a set of communication skills that we come into the world with as infants. And they have the same set of skills that maybe a young baby would have. And we are really making use of those skills. And it's not that this communication style is infantile. It's that it's human. Yes. It's wholly human. We retain these skills throughout our whole lives. And if those are the ones we have to work with at the end of life, if we have advanced dementia, then those are the ones that we should work with, rather than trying to engage someone through speech when speech is no longer possible. It's very, very challenging to encourage people to see communication in that way and to get them over the infancy connection. It's quite difficult for some people.
But what I love about this, when you get it, is that you realize that this turns our fears on its head, because people are worried that using this attuned way of interacting, of adaptive interaction, they're worried that it's disrespectful. And actually what Maggie's work helps us to realize is that it is at the heart of being respectful, so that when a person is making a bid for communication, we're noticing and we're responding. And that's what makes them feel valuable and like still a human being. If we're not doing that, in care homes across the world, there are people who mean to do good. And yet, if they don't realize it's a communicative behavior, they can't respond respectfully. So Maggie's work lets us have more respectful interactions with people who are often lonely.
We have a number of publications under the Connected Baby brand. And I did mention at the top of the interview, Maggie, that you are the lead author of the Connected Baby Guide to Advanced Dementia. What was your aim in writing the book as part of this series?
I think the main aim was to encourage people to rethink what they feel communication actually is. Because we think of communication largely as words, we have conversations with each other. If we look to the link with infancy, we can see that communication is not just about being able to use words. It's about being able to use sounds, movements, touch, all sorts of different styles of communication. There are all sorts of different styles rather than language. And those are the ones that we use as infants. And people with dementia, very advanced dementia, will use a similar set of skills. And I think we had to write this book to encourage people to see communication in a different way, to see these seemingly meaningless behaviours that people with advanced dementia may engage in as something meaningful, and linking it to infancy and showing how we bring children into the world and we encourage them to communicate is the logical way to do it. It's a difficult way to do it because it does raise a few eyebrows, but as Suzanne says, once you get it, you realise actually how respectful it is rather than infantilizing.
And one of the things that's been exciting about the book is the way people are receiving it. So we have families that have said that reading it has transformed the way they interact with their loved ones, and it was endorsed by Alzheimer's Scotland. So that message is spreading of why this is effective with the book.
As we head into the last few minutes of this podcast, and Maggie, we hope you come back in future weeks because it is really fascinating. I think we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg on this today, but it absolutely fascinating. You're taking part in the forthcoming Stories of Connection exhibition in Edinburgh, which you've contributed. You are doing a talk, I believe.
That's right,
when people come along and see you, what can they expect?
They can expect video clips, of interactions, of me interacting with people with dementia, showing them how this is possible to connect with individuals at very late stages, showing people that because you have advanced dementia doesn't mean that connection is gone, it's impossible. It certainly is possible. I'll use lots of video clips to illustrate that. There's nothing better than watching it. I could talk about it until the cows come home, but unless you see it happening, nothing beats that.
Yeah.
So I'll be using lots of examples.
Wonderful. And that's on Monday, the 5th of October, between 7:30 and 9. Stories of Connection, an exhibition and event series, takes place at the Scottish Storytelling Centre. That's on the High Street in Edinburgh, between the 18th of September and the 10th of October. Maggie, we look forward to seeing you there on the evening. And I look forward to meeting you in person as opposed to this long-distance relationship we have. And it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. And Suzanne,
You're very
thank
welcome.
you.
Maggie, thanks for coming.
And Dr.
That's okay, it didn't hurt at all.
Well, we haven't had the bill yet. I'm only joking. Dr. Maggie Ellis from the University of St Andrews, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
This was a GRC production for Connected Baby.